What if everything you've been taught about attraction was wrong? What if kindness, effort, and endless devotion weren't the keys, but the very reasons desire dies? This isn't romance, it's psychology, an algorithm buried deep within human evolution. In this investigation, we'll uncover the classified rules of attraction, the hidden forces that decide who pursues and who gets discarded. By the end, you'll see why the men who don't chase are the ones women can never stop chasing. If you're ready to stop playing blind and start mastering the matrix of attraction, subscribe now. Because what you're about to hear isn't opinion, it's the forbidden manual she was never meant to read. The archives of human behavior contain a recurring case study. The man who does everything right. He is attentive, generous, and unwavering in his devotion. He sends the good morning texts, arranges the dinners, and anticipates her needs before she voices them. And yet, despite his perfect execution, she drifts. Affection turns lukewarm, desire collapses, and the relationship decays without visible conflict. The paradox is not accidental. It is the predictable outcome of an ancient algorithm embedded in the female psyche. From an evolutionary lens, survival was never guaranteed. Women sought security in partners who could provide resources, protection, and status. But the mechanism of selection was never designed to reward consistency alone. It was tuned to detect scarcity, to value what could not be easily secured. A man who reveals his entire hand too quickly signals abundance of affection, but also a lack of competition for his attention. To the subconscious, this equates not to safety, but to diminished value. The paradox emerges clearly. The more certain she is of his devotion, the faster attraction disintegrates. Desire is not nurtured by assurance, but by uncertainty. The male who appears scarce, who withholds just enough to remain unpredictable, activates pursuit instincts that trace back to survival itself. This is not manipulation, but biology's silent calculus. Scarcity elevates status. Abundance erodes it. Psychological research reinforces this dynamic. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter linked to pursuit and motivation, spikes in conditions of unpredictability. Just as variable rewards fuel addiction in gambling, intermittent signals of affection fuel obsession in relationships. The perfect gentleman who never misses a cue removes all uncertainty, and in doing so suffocates the very mechanism that sustains desire. Thus, attraction operates less like a gift and more like a code, a formula preserved through millennia of mating strategies. Men who oversupply affection inadvertently deactivate the system. Men who project scarcity, independence, and selectivity awaken it. This is the paradox of attraction, where effort alone does not create desire, but restraint, uncertainty, and scarcity can. And this is only the beginning. For beneath this paradox lies a deeper architecture, an ancient psychology still running silently, governing who women chase and why. Case file, subject 027, male, mid-20s, exhibiting persistent nice guy behavioral patterns. Initial observations reveal excessive gifting, constant messaging, and an eagerness to provide validation at every opportunity. Outcome, rejection within 90 days. Cause of failure, conflict with the female attraction algorithm, specifically hypergamy. Hypergamy, the instinctive preference for higher-value partners, is not a modern invention, but a genetic inheritance forged across millions of years. For early women, selecting a partner was a survival decision. A weak, indecisive, or overly available man was not merely unattractive. He represented danger. His inability to compete meant fewer resources, less protection, and diminished survival odds for offspring. The instinct remains encoded, silent yet active. The nice guy experiment demonstrates how modern behavior collides with ancient wiring. By oversupplying attention, the subject signals that his value is low. If his time and affection are this abundant, the subconscious conclusion is that no competition exists for his presence. To the female psyche, this translates as weakness. Survival instincts, still operational, interpret desperation as danger. Predictability accelerates the collapse. Dopamine, the neurochemical driver of desire, thrives on variability and anticipation. When affection becomes constant and guaranteed, neural reward pathways flatline. What was once exciting becomes background noise. The subject's every act of kindness, meant to secure attachment, instead erodes it. The very reliability he believed would anchor the relationship becomes the evidence against him. Kindness, stripped of scarcity and restraint, ceases to function as attraction. It is reclassified by the subconscious as compliance. The result is predictable. The woman disengages, the man is left confused, and the cycle repeats. This is the cold arithmetic of hypergamy. Modern men misinterpret value, reducing it to material offerings, money, appearance, gifts. But the subconscious system measures differently. Strength of character, independence, scarcity of attention. The nice guy, blind to this ancient equation, fails not because he is kind, but because his kindness broadcasts weakness. Continuation of inquiry. If value is not rooted in gifts or appearance, where does it truly reside? The answer lies not in material wealth, but in psychology itself, the architecture of confidence, scarcity, and selective investment. The record is consistent across centuries of human courtship. Men who posture as endlessly accommodating, deferential, and overly invested rarely inspire lasting desire. This is not an anomaly, but a predictable outcome of hypergamy, the ancient compass still directing female psychology. Hypergamy, in its simplest form, is the subconscious drive to secure the highest value mate available. For early women, survival hinged on accurate selection. A man unable to compete, defend, or provide resources placed both her and her offspring at risk. Thus, nature embedded a filtering mechanism, not through conscious decision-making, but through attraction itself. Weakness repelled, strength compelled. The nice guy archetype violates this law. His behavior broadcasts dependency. I need you more than you need me. Every over-accommodation, every unsolicited validation, every display of gratitude for mere access signals that he is negotiating from a position of scarcity. In evolutionary terms, he has already surrendered the frame of dominance. Hypergamy interprets this imbalance as danger. A partner who cannot secure himself cannot secure her. Historical evidence aligns. In tribal societies, women gravitated toward warriors, hunters, and leaders. Men, scarce in supply, high in demand. The less accessible a man was, the more value he represented. In modern settings, the translation is seamless. Men who command social proof, confidence, or independence spark desire, not because of wealth or appearance alone, but because they embody selective scarcity. The inevitability is clear. Attraction dies when a woman feels she has already won the contest. The chase is removed, the uncertainty erased, and dopamine, the fuel of pursuit, collapses. What remains is predictability, and predictability is indistinguishable from boredom. The failure of the nice guy is not rooted in kindness itself, but in its uncalibrated excess. By oversupplying value, he erases mystery and undermines scarcity, the very conditions that sustain attraction. The question persists. If gifts, appearance, or blind generosity cannot anchor desire, what can? The answer lies deeper than surface-level success. It resides in the psychological architecture that silently governs attraction, the unseen qualities that hypergamy is programmed to detect. File reference: Behavioral Decline Study, Case 041, Initial Subject Profile, male, financially stable, socially presentable, yet repeatedly unsuccessful in sustaining female attraction. Observation reveals a consistent pattern, an over-reliance on verbal validation and constant displays of approval. Despite favorable external conditions, the subject experiences rapid disengagement from partners. Analysis indicates that attraction is not determined by resources alone, but by behavioral signaling. Hypergamy's compass does not simply measure what a man has, but how he carries himself. A wealthy man who reveals neediness through overpraise is subconsciously reclassified as low value. Conversely, a man of limited means who demonstrates confidence and perceived abundance can retain interest far longer. The mechanism is psychological. Excessive compliments operate like overused currency. Their impact diminishes with repetition. Reinforcement theory confirms that when rewards are predictable and constant, the brain reduces its dopamine response. Desire, once activated, begins to desensitize. In this way, each "you're beautiful" or "I'm lucky to have you" erodes mystery, converting what should be scarce into something monotonous. This decline is subtle but inevitable. The subconscious registers over-validation not as generosity but as dependence. Status cues collapse under the weight of transparency. When approval is given without challenge, the signal is unmistakable. He needs her more than she needs him. Attraction, which thrives on scarcity and selective recognition, withers under the burden of constant supply. The paradox is sharpened by observation of contrasting cases. A man of no wealth, no prestige, but great detachment sustains attraction precisely because his attention is rationed. The scarcity of validation amplifies its value, generating dopamine spikes and pursuit behaviors. Meanwhile, the affluent yet needy man sabotages himself by flooding the system with certainty, extinguishing the very spark he seeks to preserve. Conclusion. Attraction is perception-driven, not reality-bound. Behavior outweighs symbols. Men undermine themselves not through lack of resources, but through mismanagement of psychological currency. Excessive validation, framed as affection, is in fact the erosion of desire. Continuation. To understand why scarcity sustains attraction, one must examine the psychology of uncertainty, and why unpredictability, not stability, fuels obsession. In the study of human behavior, one principle repeats itself with absolute consistency. Uncertainty amplifies desire. When male attention is given freely and predictably, the female brain adapts. The dopamine response flattens, the excitement fades, and what once felt precious becomes ordinary. But when that same attention arrives irregularly, without pattern, something very different happens. This is the mechanism of intermittent reinforcement, the same psychological trigger that keeps people pouring money into slot machines long after reason tells them to stop. Each unpredictable reward carries far more impact than one that is guaranteed. In romantic dynamics, the effect is identical. A man who alternates between attentiveness and distance, whether consciously or unconsciously, creates a neurological loop. Each compliment, each glance, each message becomes magnified. She begins to wonder, does he truly like me? Why hasn't he replied yet? Why did his tone shift today? The unanswered questions trap her in a cycle of anticipation and pursuit. It is not the certainty of his affection that fuels her attraction. It is the mystery. Certainty requires no mental investment. Uncertainty demands it. Every hour spent decoding his signals is another layer of psychological attachment. Attention in this context functions like a currency. When distributed constantly, it loses all value. When scarce, it becomes priceless. Case studies demonstrate the same pattern across environments. The man who overwhelms with validation is consistently discarded, while the man who maintains an element of unpredictability remains the focal point of her thoughts. She is not consciously choosing this reaction. Her neurochemistry leaves her no alternative. Mystery, in this sense, is not a game. It is a mechanism. And once uncertainty has taken root, her behavior will shift. She will begin to test him, probing for signs of weakness, searching for proof of whether his value is real or an illusion. These tests are not acts of cruelty, but the subconscious machinery of attraction in motion. Throughout recorded observation of human courtship, one behavioral pattern emerges with remarkable consistency. Women deploy tests. These are not conscious strategies, but subconscious mechanisms designed to separate strength from weakness, abundance from scarcity. The purpose is survival-driven. A man who collapses under these subtle pressures signals that he cannot protect, cannot lead, and cannot endure. A man who holds steady signals the opposite. The tests take recognizable forms. The comparison test, in which she casually references another man's attractiveness or success, is less about that man and more about measuring her partner's stability. The availability test, when she cancels plans without warning, gauges whether he responds with desperation or composure, and the attitude test, where she withdraws affection or delivers coldness, exists only to see if his emotional frame remains intact. In every case, failure equals neediness. Success equals indifference. The indifferent man archetype has appeared across centuries. In ancient accounts, he was the warrior who seemed unmoved by female advances, the one whose value was self-evident because he never chased. In modern studies, he is the man with the abundance mindset, not because he keeps multiple women, but because he carries himself as though he could. His attention is not easily won, not because of malice, but because he lives independent of validation. Psychologically, this detachment functions as high-value signaling. Indifference suggests options. It suggests resilience. It suggests that his self-worth is not contingent on a single woman's response. To the female subconscious, this is strength. A man so centered in his own frame cannot be easily manipulated, cannot be easily lost, and therefore represents the safest genetic and emotional bet. This is why women equate indifference with power, and why pass. Seeing these subconscious tests deepens their attraction. In her mind, each demonstration of calm restraint confirms that he is not merely another man hoping for approval, but a man operating from abundance. And in this confirmation, desire does not fade, it intensifies. Confidential record. Subject analysis. The distinction between love and attraction has proven critical in long-term relational dynamics. Field data indicates that men often conflate the two, operating under the belief that demonstrations of care, commitment, and loyalty, the markers of love, are sufficient to sustain female desire. Repeated observation contradicts this. Love without attraction consistently results in platonic categorization or gradual sexual decline. Conversely, attraction without love leads to short-term escalation, but no endurance. Sustained passion requires the simultaneous presence of both forces. Laboratory simulations of relational behavior reveal how women continuously probe for attraction cues, even within committed bonds. These probes manifest as withdrawal of warmth, subtle references to rivals, or emotional volatility. The pattern aligns with evolutionary psychology. What appears as erratic testing is in fact subconscious fitness assessment. The female brain, calibrated by survival pressures, seeks to ensure her partner maintains resilience, confidence, and frame under stress. From a behavioral standpoint, these tests are identical to intermittent stressors applied in controlled experiments. Withdrawal functions as a deprivation cycle, designed to measure whether the subject collapses into neediness or maintains composure. Rival references activate jealousy triggers, measuring competitive stability. Emotional challenges simulate unpredictable environments, filtering out men who cannot withstand tension. The results confirm a single principle. Attraction is maintained not by comfort, but by the perception of strength under duress. The evolutionary purpose is clear. In unstable ancestral conditions, women relied on cues of psychological resilience as a predictor of survival capacity. A man who wavers under minor emotional trials is unlikely to endure greater external threats. Attraction, therefore, is not a surface-level preference, but an adaptive mechanism engineered to preserve security and continuity. This explains why love, though meaningful, cannot override the need for attraction. Without challenge, pursuit, and unpredictability, desire decays. Without commitment, trust never solidifies. It is the tension between the two, love providing safety, attraction providing volatility, that creates long-term passion. Every subconscious test, whether minor or severe, serves as a reminder. The experiment never ends. Archival dissection. Collected findings. Relationship collapse is most frequently traced to a single overlooked variable: predictability. Once patterns stabilize into certainty, mental investment declines. Dopamine, the neurochemical of pursuit and novelty, desensitizes under conditions of routine. What once provoked curiosity becomes baseline noise. Observation confirms that women disengage not because affection fades, but because emotional variety disappears. Contrary to cultural myths, the so-called bad boy archetype is not inherently magnetic due to cruelty or neglect. His appeal lies in unpredictability. Intermittent attention, alternating presence with absence, sustains dopamine spikes in the female brain similar to gambling addiction cycles. The unpredictability creates anticipation. Anticipation fuels obsession. Predictability, by contrast, extinguishes both. The data separates two distinct but parallel forces, love and attraction. Love is chemically underpinned by oxytocin and vasopressin, the neurochemicals of bonding, safety, and familiarity. It fosters pair bonding, trust, and stability, necessary for cooperative survival. Attraction, however, is dopamine-driven, thriving on novelty, uncertainty, and pursuit. The two can exist independently. Love without attraction generates stability without desire. Attraction without love produces volatility without continuity. The recurrent error among men is the confusion of these forces. They believe that love, once established, guarantees sustained attraction. Yet the archive shows this is false. Love alone, with its emphasis on safety and routine, accelerates predictability and undermines pursuit. When a man becomes permanently accessible, always accommodating and transparent in his intentions, the evolutionary system interprets it as low stimulation and low value. Desire recedes. The case studies converge on Obsess. Conclusion. Predictability is terminal to attraction. Women do not abandon relationships because of an absence of love, but because the dopamine pathway has gone silent. Emotional variety, inconsistency in timing, novelty in behavior, controlled uncertainty in responses, maintains attraction's current. Without it, even genuine affection becomes indistinguishable from platonic care. The record therefore establishes an unambiguous principle. Love stabilizes. Attraction destabilizes. To sustain both simultaneously requires mastering frame control, the ability to regulate emotional climate without surrendering unpredictability. It is this balance, safety without monotony, volatility without chaos, that prevents relational entropy. Dossier analysis. Subject: frame control in male-female dynamics. Frame is defined as the lens through which reality is filtered and enforced. Within attraction studies, it functions as the governing narrative, whose perspective defines the interaction, whose interpretation of events prevails. Women, by evolutionary design, probe and test this frame with consistency. The objective is not malice, but measurement, an instinctive calibration of strength, certainty, and leadership. A man with a strong frame remains unshaken, calm, decisive. A weak frame collapses under pressure, signaling neediness, approval-seeking, and low value. The archive identifies frame control as the decisive mechanism behind addictive attraction. Men who project scarcity, mystery, and confidence trigger reward pathways in the female brain identical to those observed in behavioral addictions. Intermittent reinforcement is central. Approval is given sparingly, unpredictably, and without attachment to her behavior. Each rare signal of validation acts as a dopamine surge, magnifying her fixation. The less frequent the reward, the more it dominates her mental bandwidth. Case parallels are evident with gambling addiction. Slot machines rely on uncertainty, delivering small, unpredictable wins that hijack the dopamine system. Similarly, when a man with a strong frame offers validation irregularly, it creates a loop of anticipation and obsession. She invests more attention, not less, when outcomes are uncertain. Predictability extinguishes the effect. Scarcity intensifies it. Confidence and detachment further magnify this dynamic. A man who behaves as if he does not need her, whose identity is not contingent on her approval, embodies abundance. The subconscious reads this as high status, high selectivity, and therefore high value. By contrast, the man who overgives, overvalidates, or shifts his frames A to accommodate hers dissolves attraction at its root. Final observation. Women do not consciously seek addiction, yet they become ensnared in its mechanics when exposed to men who wield frame control. It is not cruelty that binds them, but the disciplined projection of scarcity, certainty, and unshakable self-definition. The evidence establishes a simple but unforgiving law. Men who master frame do not chase. They become the gravity around which desire orbits. Forensic record. Final entry. The investigation concludes here on the final principle that governs attraction across epochs, cultures, and environments: abundance. It is not measured in wealth, possessions, or the number of women surrounding a man. Abundance is the internal certainty that his value exists independent of her approval. This orientation shifts the entire dynamic. When a man behaves as though he needs her, he signals deficiency. When he behaves as though she must earn him, he signals value. The subconscious female response is involuntary. Desire intensifies in the presence of scarcity. Analysis confirms a formula consistent across recorded case studies. Scarcity plus uncertainty plus perceived value minus neediness equals obsession. Each variable can be traced to evolutionary imperatives. Scarcity indicates rare genetic and social resources. Uncertainty maintains the dopamine-driven pursuit instinct. Perceived value aligns with survival-driven mate selection. Absence of neediness signifies strength and self-sufficiency. When combined, these traits activate the deepest layers of the attraction algorithm. The paradox is stark. Love, as neurobiology reveals, thrives on safety, care, and consistent nurturing. Oxytocin bonds that stabilize. Attraction, however, depends on tension, on the subtle sense that something could be lost, that the outcome is never fully secure. This tension is not cruelty, but design. Without it, desire erodes. With it, obsession ignites. Thus, the abundance mindset is less about strategy than identity. The man who embodies it does not perform detachment. He is detached. He does not ration validation as manipulation. He simply does not need her validation to define himself. In this state, his presence becomes gravity. She orbits not because he demands it, but because his frame, his scarcity, and his inner certainty make leaving fee unthinkable. Final note. The archive closes with one directive: stop chasing. Start becoming the man she feels fortunate to pursue. The data admits no exceptions. Abundance is not an accessory to attraction. It is the rule that binds the system, the law beneath the shadows. The archive is clear. Attraction is not built on gifts, approval, or constant devotion. It thrives on scarcity, uncertainty, and the unshakable frame of a man who does not need to be chosen. Love may bond, but attraction obeys tension, and only those who master both keep desire alive. The final rule is simple: stop chasing, start becoming. Because when you embody abundance, she doesn't just stay, she obsesses. If this investigation gave you a new lens on attraction, subscribe to Attraction Matrix and join the study. The next chapter begins when you decide to read the manuscript she was never meant to see.